Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this opening ceremony of the 35th Organization of the Assembly of the Union. The program today stands as follows. We will have a statement by His Excellency, Mr. Musa Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, followed by a statement by His Excellency, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Then His Excellency Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, will address the Assembly virtually. The video statement will be followed by a statement by His Excellency Mr. Felix Antonio Tshisekedi Chilombo, President of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We will then have an announcement of the Bureau of the Assembly of the African Union for 2022, followed by a handover statement by the outgoing chairperson of the African Union, Mr. Felix Tshisekedi, President of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Last but not the least, we'll have an acceptance statement by the incoming chairperson of the African Union. Without much further ado, I wish to humbly request His Excellency, Mr. Musa Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union, to deliver his statement. Your Excellency, sir.
Excellency Mr. Antoine Felix Tshisekedi Chilombo, current Chairman of the African Union, President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished Heads of Delegation, Honorable Ministers, the Madam Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Chief Executives of the Regional Economic Communities, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, commissioners, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. At last, we are meeting here physically at the headquarters of our organization in Addis Ababa. The hospitable city, teeming with culture, art, and historical heritage attractions and evocative of the beauty never tarnished by time. Excellency President Antoine Felix Tshisekedi, as you are going to hand over to your successor, may I express my heartfelt gratitude and my warm compliments for the immense work carried out at the helm of our continental organization throughout the past year. I commend the excellent, friendly, fruitful, and intense work experience we have had with you and under your leadership. Excellency Macky Sall, President of the Republic of Senegal, and the incoming Chairman of our Union, I welcome you and wish you every success during your term. Your pragmatism, your sense of method, your determination, your ambitions for Africa raise real hopes that the project initiated by your predecessors will find a new impetus despite the difficult economic and health circumstances. I wish you full success in your chairmanship. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 pandemic has challenged mankind deep down and it's very conscious. We cannot, when we are meeting physically for the first time since the outbreak of the pandemic, avoid asking ourselves about ourselves, our doubts, our anxieties, our concerns for our organization and for our Africa. Two major scourges, that is COVID-19 and terrorism at the continental level, must add to our intrinsic fragilities that the two scourges have exposed. On COVID-19, the champion in this field, President Cyril Ramaphosa, will present to you the essence of our efforts over the past 2 years, as well as the guidelines of our strategy of resistance and future triumph against the devastating pandemic. Two major players will be called upon to play a leading role in this strategy. Africa CDC, whose operationalization is in progress. It will occupy in our institutional landscape the status of a specialized agency, endowed with the autonomy of action dictated by the nature of its mission, while remaining firmly anchored within the continental organization. The African Medicines Agency, AMA, is preparing to play its part in this fight to promote public health, the life and well-being of Africans. The acquisition of vaccines and their manufacture in Africa seem to be the major point of this strategy. The impact of COVID-19 resulted in a contraction in growth of 2.1% in 2020 and an increase in the debt ratio by 10 points of GDP. Africa, due to the insufficiency of external financing to compensate for the low rate of its savings, will not be able to regain the dynamics of its growth before the onset of COVID-19. Active in the mobilization of financial resources for the continent, both by the reduction, indeed, the debt cancellation and by the mobilization of the special drawing rights. Our strategy will focus on the identification, indeed the invention of other innovative sources of financing and reducing the harmful effects of the pandemic on our economies with their well-known structural weaknesses. Our great challenge is and remains in this area the realization of autonomy in the financing of our own development through an energetic fight against illicit capital flows, through the reform of our fiscal policies, and through the acceleration of the establishment of African financial institutions. On the expansion of terrorism, everybody is aware that everybody is aware of the scourge in assuming the unprecedented proportion at the continental level, formerly confined to two small areas. The north of the Sahel and the Horn of Africa is now extending its tentacles to the south of the Sahel, in the center and indeed to the northern regions of the continent. The security situation of the continent today is deeply marked by the metastasis of terrorism and the dangerous resurgence of unconstitutional changes of government. Furthermore, two phenomena establish causal links known. On one hand, very often we find the pretext in the significance and expansion. On the other hand, the necessary fight against the latter produces the illusion that the second is the answer to the proven failures in the fight against the first one. The security situation on the continent calls for a real new approach, which should question our peace and security architecture and its correlation with the new destabilizing factors in Africa. In the absence of this burst of intelligence and decisions, I have serious questions about the future of our flagship project on silencing the guns within the fixed timeline. The dangerous expansion of evil demands stronger international mobilization and a greater inter-African solidarity, which is more fruitful, more concrete, and more active. It is particularly disconcerting to see here and there the vague desire of non-African commitment to support the African countries under attack, while the tenuous ray of African solidarity only allows us to see the immensity of the African paralysis in the face of the burning neighboring houses. The context marked by the two scourges would have made it possible to glimpse the rays of hope if the world were not one where national selfishness, inward-looking attitudes, and the collapse of the values of solidarity and generosity, the fruits of our common humanity, visibly tarnished. The profound and irrefutable truth, however, is that no part of the international community can be reassured about its fate when all the others parts are not. The crisis of multilateralism exists, is real and significant. Obviously, there are many attempts to approach Africa, and this no doubt indicates a growing interest in the continent. But this interest has not yet frankly been translated into a substantial development-centric consideration in favor of Africa. The idea for a time-reflective Marshall Plan for the continent has gradually vanished. I am not far from thinking intensely that such a plan, however necessary, will never come from the outside world. Here, more than ever before, the African leadership is strongly challenged for an awakening for the mobilization of endogenous resources that reveals the immense potential of the continent. There is no salvation except in this African direction for Africa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the context fairly depicted in broad outlines is nevertheless the framework within which, with the support of most of you, we have been able to deploy ourselves by making, to the best of our ability, use of the assets at our disposal. The redeployment in such a context enables us to put our finger on the areas of pain that I considered useful to expose to you explicitly and candidly. In doing so, I trust your wisdom, your sagacity, and your immense experience to listen to me on this matter and take the appropriate decisions, those that all the stakeholders of the continent expect you to take. At the forefront of the constraints experienced are the legal and political limits. We have, of course, launched the institutional reform of our organization. It has made it possible to make significant progress towards improving our internal management and efficiency. I wish here to pay deserved tribute to President Paul Kagame, who was champion and architect, as well as the men and women, including the head of the reform unit, who supported him in this endeavor. In spite of the undeniable progress, the reform remains silent on the situation of notorious legal fragility of the Commission and its chairperson. Their powers and competences remain the same as before the reform. How do such powers and competences reduce the leadership role of the Commission? Two major questions constrain the Commission to a rather modest role in the African decision-making process. The first is the narrow reading of the concept of subsidiarity. We certainly need to clarify better the relationship of subsidiarity and complementarity between the regional economic communities and the continental organization. Beyond, however, to declare here and there that the decision of an organ of the AU, in this case the Peace and Security Council on Mali, should be dependent on the decisions of a regional organization, namely ECOWAS. There is really a big gap. It is important that our summit brings here the necessary clarification to avoid any detrimental drift to the functioning of our political and security architecture. The second problem to consider is the question of the sovereignty of states. This is a protective shield against all sorts of abuses occurring in a member country. A restrictive, even dogmatic reading of the intangible principle of the sovereignty of the member states raises an iron wall against any intervention by the continental organization, either as a preventive measure through early warning or as a remedy when the crisis has broken out. We should not therefore be surprised under these conditions to see the Commission being treated here and there as a simple secretariat of the states. Sovereignty is not unique to our organization, and I know it. All international and regional organizations are facing this. But its force and the restrictive readings to which it is subjected as the AU remain excessive and are detrimental to the full capacity of the organization for initiative and action. This double handicap was not unrelated to the conduct of the Commission to the face of unconstitutional changes of government, a disastrous wave of which has been sweeping in recent times and not only in West Africa. It was, however, clear that such situation was almost inevitable if a certain number of measures and political initiatives were not taken with the desired speed. Solidarity and state sovereignty made any proactive action by the Commission impossible. This situation can only result in a gradual slumber of the role of the leader of the organization at the political and diplomatic levels. On this 20th anniversary of the African Union, a day of renaissance, remembrance, assessment, meditation, and projection into the future, I'll call for more inventiveness and the creative spirit to give back to the operational organ of our union greater possibility of action and influence on the political future of our states, in particular when these are in real need for attention. In this effort to awaken the organization through an inventive reflection of the best modes and models, how can we not question our democratic systems and our peace and security architecture? Have these been able to promote operations ensuring the minimum of good governance? The fight against corruption, nepotism, mismanagement, exclusion, have they made it possible to fulfill our dream of an Africa where we have silenced the guns? Are we determined enough to reform our Peace and Security Council? Have we mobilized enough efforts for the reform of the United Nations Security Council by opening, when the time comes, a credible corridor for Africa to enter this body in charge of peace in the world? In a word, have our models made it possible to meet the expectations of hundreds of millions of young people and African women burned by the unbearable turpitudes of the political classes with efficiency and ethical values in continual collapse? In other words, have they made it possible to raise the dikes necessary for the easy populism which prepares the ground for coup d'etat and rebellions? There is certainly a vast number of issues, the perceptive, courageous and innovative consideration of which can no longer be deferred. In the constellation of political constraints, how not to deplore the shortcomings in the application of the dual principle of speaking with one voice and African solutions to African problems. We wonder in many specific cases, what is the purpose of our decisions? In this sphere and many others, in how many situations have we not been led to bitter observation of fact, sometimes more humiliating than embarrassing, of the lack of the imperative need to speak with one voice on our own problems and on those that bring us together with our international partners? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, do not blame me for having taken much of your precious time. My understanding of my duty and of the responsibilities which you have honored me with dictates to me the obligation to always speak to you frankly and in all sincerity, while at the same time confining myself ultimately to your great wisdom. Of course, our agenda has a number of issues to which I will refer and address later on. The Palestinian question and the granting of observer status to the State of Israel is one of those specific issues which I will address later. I would like at this juncture just stress two aspects. I would like just at this, that is the first one, the need for a serene debate, far from any attempt to exploit this issue for political purposes, to become aware clearly of the relationship between the unwavering position of the African Union on the cause of the Palestinian people and the recognition of observer status for Israel. Our commitment to supporting the Palestinian people in their legitimate quest for freedom and independence and their inalienable right to the establishment of their own national state alongside the State of Israel, in conformity with the relevant decisions of the African Union and the United Nations based on the principle of two states living together in peace, harmony, and mutual respect, and is unchanging and can only continue to grow stronger. The second aspect is my intimate conviction that the observer status granted to Israel in full compliance with the SID criteria, which governs the matter, makes it possible to give our organization more latitude and the possibility of playing its role in the promotion of our decisions on the issue, exactly like the Afro-Arab countries which have made the recognition of Israel an instrument in the service of peace and the quest for the best ways and means for the confirmation of the principle of two Palestinian and Israeli states living in perfect harmony. The second specific issue relates to our partnerships. The proliferation of these partnerships, a sign of interest in Africa and the dynamism of our continent and its organization, no longer allows us to engage in them without really revisiting our approaches to such partnerships. It is imperative to focus them on concrete, transformative and integrating mega projects in the 5 priority areas of peace and energy, infrastructure and energy, climate change, innovative development financing, training of youth and empowerment of women. These projects currently under execution require the mobilization of substantial financial resources to achieve the structural transformation of our economies. This is the only way to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth capable of cushioning the impact of shocks such as financial crisis, the effects of climate change and pandemics. I hope that the summits that we are planning this year with our partners will be decisive moments for the implementation of a vision of international partnerships of Africa with the rest of the world. Such a redefinition of our strategic partnerships constitutes, in my view, a decisive lever for the role of Africa in the design of a new world order in harmony with our hopes. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I now have the honor of requesting His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Congo Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia to make his statement. Thank you. Sorry.
Your Excellency, Plexi Tshisekedi, President of the Democratic Republic of Congo and outgoing Chairperson of the African Union, Your Excellency, Macky Sall, President of the Republic of Senegal and incoming Chairperson of the African Union, Your Excellency, Moussa Faki Mohamed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished ministers, commissioners, excellencies, ambassadors, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me welcome you all to the land of origins on behalf of the people and government of Ethiopia. Let me also take this opportunity to celebrate our reunion in Addis Ababa after a 2-year disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, I wish to express my appreciation to the entire leadership of our union, and particularly to His Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, for providing exemplary leadership in our collective response to the challenge of the pandemic. Over the past 2 years, we have struggled not only against the human cost of the pandemic, but also an inequitable system of vaccine distribution, arbitrary travel bans, border closures, lockdowns, and misinformation about the value of vaccines. Most importantly, as Africans, we have also learned that cooperation and collaboration is vital, not only for our health, but also for our collective survival. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our union has committed to undertake ambitious plans designed to transform our continent and create the Africa we want. We want a prosperous Africa based on sustainable and equitable development. We want a politically united continent that aspires to fulfill the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of an African Renaissance. Fulfilling our aim of birthing the Africa we want through robust implementation of Agenda 2063 and its flagship project will require us to make extraordinary efforts collectively. Our theme for 2022 is nutrition and food security. Over the past year, acute food insecurity in Africa has increased by over 60%. The effect of COVID-19 continues to aggravate our fragile economies. Floods, droughts, desert locusts, and other climate-related natural disasters have increased food insecurity for millions of our citizens. With 60% of the world's arable land in Africa, it is of utmost importance that we need to use our natural asset to maximize agricultural output and feed our people without reliance on external assistance. In the past 2 years, Ethiopia has made substantial investment in intensifying in summer wheat production through irrigation. Our farmers have been able to control and manage production factors to maximize yields using irrigation. Nationally, we have attained production over 20 million quintals of irrigation wheat farmed on over 500,000 hectares. This has generated nearly 60 billion birr in income to our farmers. These efforts are generating great results and will, in the imaginable future, begin to contribute to our food security and self-sufficiency, despite the climate variability our region is confronted with. One of the toughest challenges we face in Ethiopia is dealing with the effect of deforestation. While a century ago, Ethiopia's forest coverage was 35%. Over the past 2 decades, our forest coverage stands at just 4%. We believe afforestation is one of the most effective ways of climate change mitigation. Beginning in 2019, we launched a major reforestation initiative under the slogan Green Legacy. Our aim was to plant 20 billion trees across the country over the course of a 4-year period. In a mere 3 years, we managed to plant 18 billion seedlings. And this year, with the Green Legacy Initiative in its final year, we will not only meet our national target, but plan to surpass the target by reaching 25 billion. Additionally, through this initiative, we have sent seedlings to neighboring countries to inspire regional efforts. If we can collaborate to spread the message of Green Legacy in the continent and implement measures that maximize our food security and self-sufficiency, we'll be able to guarantee our citizens the basic necessity of life without reliance on charity. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa's voice on the world stage needs to be heard loud and clear. Africa must also be represented on important international bodies. Today, more than 7 decades after the creation of the United Nations, Africa remains a junior partner without meaningful input or role in the system of international governance. This is particularly true of the United Nations, where Africa lacks representation on the Security Council and is underrepresented in a variety of ways. It is the right time to reform and revitalize the United Nations system to reflect current global realities and ensure that it is a more representative and equitable body. Only fair representation and transparency in those institutions can usher in a just era in multilateralism. Consistent with our Esluini consensus of 2005, we should collectively insist that Africa's reasonable request for no less than 2 permanent seats and 5 non-permanent seats in the UN Security Council be adopted. Equally important is Africa's media representation on the international stage. Africa is often portrayed in international media negatively. The endless representation of the continent troubled by civil wars, hunger, corruption, greed, disease, and poverty is demeaning and dehumanizing, and likely driven by a calculated strategy and agenda. This stereotypical and negative media representation of Africa not only disinforms the rest of the world about our continent, but also shapes the way we see ourselves as Africans. Telling our own stories and shaping our own narratives must be our top priority. In this regard, I would like to propose to this august body the establishment of an African Union Continental Media House. This media house could be organized to provide authoritative news and information on our continent, fight disinformation, promote our collective agenda, and offer opportunities for Pan-African voice to be heard. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, peace and security are critical issues affecting our continent. Despite the African Union's intensive engagement in addressing peace and security challenges of the continent, guided by the maxim, African solution to African problems, new and complex problems that undermine our unity and sovereignty continue to emerge. In this respect, the past year was particularly challenging to our continent in general, and my own country, Ethiopia, in particular. Ethiopia's challenge was internal in nature and a matter of maintaining law and order. But resolution of our internal matters was made exceedingly difficult by the role played by external actors. I wish to take this opportunity to thank you all for your support, solidarity, and understanding as we underwent these trying times. As you are aware, despite the intransigence of the other side in this conflict, my government has taken a variety of measures to minimize the loss of life and destruction of property. We have implemented unilateral withdrawal from conflict area and used force that is necessary to ensure law and order. As a gesture of goodwill, we have released high-profile suspects with a view of creating conducive environment for peace. We shall leave no stone unturned in our search for peace in our country. Consistent with our commitment to peace, to peaceful resolution of conflict, we have recently launched an inclusive national dialogue platform with formal legislation. Our commitment to pursuing lasting and durable peace in our country shall remain steadfast. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest lesson that Ethiopia has learned over the past year is that without the solidarity of our African brothers and sisters, our existence as a nation would have been at great risk. This affirms the wisdom of our forefathers and foremothers in their dream of Pan-Africanism. The old saying is true: united we stand, divided we fall. Today, we stand proud and tall as Africans in the shadow of those who struggled to liberate and unite Africa. Our steadfast unity is the anchor and the foundation of our Agenda 2063. A continent of 1.3 billion people, a substantial percentage of them young and dynamic, will drive Africa's prosperity and pull it out of poverty as we set forth in our Agenda 2063. Also, our Continental Free Trade Agreement holds the greatest promise of effectively realizing continental integration and development. The potential for increased intra-Africa trade, free movement of people, and investment and self-reliance is a beacon for Africa's renaissance. Instead of depending solely on trade out of Africa, our collective effort to boost intra-Africa trade will protect us from the fluctuation of global economic and political change. Similarly, the potential for continent-wide tourism remains untapped. It is part of aspiration of 5 of Agenda 2063, which seeks to create an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. The more we know each other, the more we are able to cooperate and resist the force that seek to divide and undermine us. You may recall, a mere 2 months ago, efforts were underway by some in the international community to create an atmosphere of fear to drive expatriates out of Ethiopia and discourage travel to Ethiopia. Those efforts were not successful and will not be successful. Indeed, many fellow Africans joined the Great Ethiopian Diaspora Homecoming Challenge and proved to the world that Ethiopia is a safe and culturally rich tourist destination. As a key pillar of our national reform agenda, tourism potential within Ethiopia has been augmented greatly in the past 2 years, with many natural endowments developed to complement the historic and cultural heritage that already exists. Ethiopia remains open and welcomes all of our fellow African brothers and sisters. Finally, let me once again convey the warm welcome of the Ethiopian people and reiterate Ethiopia's commitment to do everything in our power to continue to create an enabling environment for the African Union in our collective efforts to deliver the Africa we want through robust implementation of Agenda 2063. God bless Ethiopia. God bless Africa. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now invite His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, who will address the Assembly via visual conference. Thank you.
Excellences, chers invités, mesdames et messieurs.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my sincere gratitude to you for affording me this opportunity to address the Assembly today and to welcome the Deputy Secretary General, Mrs. Amina Mohammed, who is stepping in for me. Africa is a continent of hope. For the past 20 years, the African Union has contributed to bringing to life this hope to enable the continent attain its full potential. From the CFTA to the recent launching of the Decade of Financial and Economic Inclusion for Women, and also the transformation of food and agricultural systems, cooperation between the African Union and the United Nations Organization is stronger today more than ever before. By the same token, both organizations are working hard to implement the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063, and this is really a cornerstone in our relationship. Your common vision and your unity of purpose is relevant today. We are living through very difficult times. Injustice is deeply entrenched in global systems, and the African people suffer the most. And because of the unequal distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, the rate of vaccination in the high-income countries is 7 times higher than the vaccination rate in African countries. A morally decadent global financial system has abandoned the African countries, depriving the African people of the necessary investment opportunities, reducing growth prospects, and locking our African countries in an endless spiral of debt and staggering interest rates. The combat against nation and insufficient action to slow down climate change is affecting mostly the most vulnerable. The immoral inequalities is choking the African continent, stoking the embers of conflicts and political, economic, ethnic, social tensions, violation of human rights, violence against women, terrorism, military coups, and also a feeling of impunity. Millions of African people are displaced across the continent, and our democratic institutions are becoming moribund. Our world is in dire need of solidarity. You can count on me and the family of the United Nations to support Africa at a time when we're trying to ignite 4 engines of recovery. Firstly, we need to boost the production of vaccine and vaccination for all. And I actually salute the leadership of the African continent to establish the African Vaccine Acquisition Tax Team, AVAT, and other mechanisms that have actually made it possible for the continent to have 34 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. And I am thrilled to hear recently that starting this year, South Africa and other African countries will be manufacturing vaccines. And I'm appealing to all developed countries and other manufacturers to rally their support behind the African AVAT and COVAX mechanisms. It is really necessary I call on all countries to provide necessary conditions to enable us manufacture vaccines in Africa by actually resolving the problem of intellectual property. And I'm calling on the world to brace up for the next outbreak of epidemic by investing in primary health care and also vaccines that will save lives today and tomorrow, and also by supporting the activities of major institutions like the African CDC.
We need to ignite the engine of economic recovery by reforming the global financial system. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals depends on supporting massive investments in strong health and education systems, in job creation, especially in the green and care sectors, and in universal social protection, gender equality, and opportunities for young people. But the deck is stacked against Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is facing cumulative economic growth per capita over the next 5 years that is 75% less than the rest of the world. We need to accelerate investment into Africa. We need to deliver real investment resources, including by redirecting special drawing rights to countries that need support now, reforming the international debt architecture for the future, increasing concessional forms of finance, and ensuring that African countries with sound economic fundamentals are not unduly penalized by markets and the ratings institutions. And we need to fulfill the immense promise of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Third, we need to ignite the engine of a green recovery across Africa. Africa contributes just 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but many of the worst impacts of climate change are being felt there. To address today's tragic reality, we need a radical boost in funding for adaptation and mitigation on the continent. The Glasgow commitment to double adaptation finance from $20 billion must be implemented. But this is not enough. Access and eligibility systems must be reviewed to allow developing countries to get the finance they need on time. I commend EU member states for ambitious nationally determined contributions and adopting the African Union Green Stimulus Program. I am committed to working with the global community to match Africa's climate ambitions with the resources, financing, and technologies it needs to accelerate the transition from coal to renewables and create new green jobs. I'm calling on wealthier countries to make good on the $100 billion climate finance commitment to developing countries starting this year, and all to account private sector partners who have made commitments so far. Our planet will speed past the 1.5-degree temperature thresholds without steep emission cuts this decade by all major economies. We are in emergency mode, and we need all hands on deck. COP27 in Egypt will be an opportunity for Africa and our world. And fourth, we need to ignite the engine of peace across Africa. Conflicts and violence have many roots, from economic inequalities and competition for scarce resources to ethnic and religious tensions, among others. African states are proudly multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and multicultural. And the EU is about showing how people can coexist, even flourish, by working together. That requires inclusive and participatory structures that speak to this diversity in all its richness through governance that delivers for all. We need to bolster platforms for inclusivity, especially for young Africans. We need connectivity to access information, communication, education, and jobs. The United Nations is committed to working with the African Union to strengthen democratic and responsive governance structures and people's faith in them. This requires leadership on all sides. For example, we have signed an important new framework to ensure the EU peace support operations are planned and conducted in full compliance with international human rights and humanitarian law. Our recent shared commitment to take forward a joint strategic assessment on security in the Sahel to improve our collective efforts is another example. And I reaffirm my appeal for a cessation of hostilities, humanitarian access, and inclusive national dialogue in Ethiopia, the seat of the African Union and a country that is critical to continental stability. And I pledge the full support of my good offices to silence the guns across the continent. From our joint missions and programs, to strengthening electoral processes and peaceful transfers of power, to the UN's peacekeeping and peacebuilding efforts, to our commitment to robust support to African forces and interventions to tackle terrorism across Africa, including my advocacy for the UN Security Council to support the predictable financing of Africa-led operations under Chapter 7. My report on our common agenda offers a fresh opportunity to rethink and reposition our approach to peace in Africa and ensure our peace architecture is fit for purpose to address the rapid shifts and changes we see across the continent and around the world. I encourage your continued engagement as we advance this agenda together. Excelências, não é fácil alcançar a paz, mas a paz é...
Excellencies, peace is not easy to achieve, but peace is absolutely necessary. Let us continue to work together with a common goal in mind with and for the people of Africa. Let us bring to life the words of late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. My humanity is dependent on yours, for only together we are human. As this summit begins, I reiterate that UN is proud to walk this path with you in the struggle for dignity, equality, peace, and justice for all, with solidarity and always guided by a spirit of humanity and hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now invite His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Shittai, Prime Minister of the State of